Hi, hello, and welcome. Day 3 of the Global Landscapes Forum and another day on WUFA. Thank you all for watching, ladies and gentlemen, guys. Incentives for a green economy, new means to
Hi, hello,
promote
and welcome. Day 3 of the
sustainable
Global
production
Landscapes
methods.
Forum and another day on WUFA. Thank you all for watching, ladies and gentlemen.
For those who've already taken part in the sessions, it's business as usual. You can see that it's not quite business as usual for us yet. And I would like to extend a special welcome. And we continue. There would be a couple of instructions that we are giving during this session. And let's now get into the issue, and hopefully we've overcome all the problems that we've just had at the beginning. You will have already read on the WUFA on the page that this session is about new means to promote sustainable production methods. And the question is, of course, what do we talk about? We talk about money in the end. Then the money is necessary in order to do things differently. And of course, it's a question of how to distribute it in the best way possible. Now, quite a number of governments have already taken care of that. They're rethinking traditional ways of distributing money. They're onboarding partially the private sector. But of course, there are different views of how to do it best. Do you do it via a fund? Do you do it with grants? And maybe you do it directly and distribute the money to the farmers on the ground. So, in order to discuss the different issues that there are, I have a fantastic panel out there, and I'd like to bring them into the conversation very soon. Now, I say hello to Bernard Worm, who is currently a Senior Policy Advisor at the section of Rural Development, Land Rights, Forest and Animal Husbandry within the special initiative One World, No Hunger at the German Federal Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development. Gosh, what a title, Bernard. Hi.
Hi, Connie. Hi, everyone.
Sylvia Wisniewski is with us. She is Managing Director of Finance in Motion, one of the world's leading impact asset managers, whose focus is on development finance. And that, if that doesn't mean too much to you, ladies and gentlemen, guys out there, Sylvia is the best person to explain everything about finances, so you can direct your questions to her. I believe WWF, I do not actually need to explain or talk about, but what you might not know as yet is that WWF has developed a concept in the last couple of years for something called land use bankable projects. And Yuga van La is working on the implementation of forest and climate pilot projects in Indonesia, Russia, Far East and Democratic Republic of the Congo. That's her former role. And now she concentrates on these bankable projects in order to leverage private money to shift from unsustainable to sustainable business. Great that you are with us. And last but not least in the round of experts is Dr. Elke Manningel. She leads the international project at Oro. Hi. The Tropical Forest Foundation. Oro Verde's international projects combine sustainable local development and restoration of forests and or ecosystem-based adaptation and agricultural practices. And she'll share her views with us in a moment. Welcome, Elke. Last but not least, we have a real coffee farmer in this round, and an exception to boot, since there are not many female coffee producers and owners, certainly not in Nicaragua. Matra Albir and her sister are changing their farm to become more sustainable in every dimension, and they have had support from both specialized banks and one of the funds we're going to talk about. So nice that you're with us. Okay, let's get the show on the road. Bernard, let's talk about you as an eagle. I.e., you look at things from high above. Tell us, why is this topic so important for your ministry, and what's the vision behind it?
Okay, thank you very much for your kind introduction, Connie. Can you hear me? Am I clear? because now
Perfect.
I just use awesome. Okay, excellent. Thank you very much. Yeah, thanks again, and hello to everyone in the panel, but also out there. Good morning, good evening, good day. I don't know where you are. I'm very excited actually today because this is the first Global Landscapes Forum in a digital way. We talked about it already since a while with the GLF team, and now we see how good it works and how good it suits to the current situation when we talk about climate crisis, but also, of course, the COVID-19 crisis. So I'm excited about that, but also I'm excited about the topic we are talking about because it's a super important, very important topic. And it's about how we can get the economy greener. And even though we know that the nature is the basis for all our existence, for all our environmental behavior, we are kind of overusing it and in a very fast speed. Wherever we look, we see humankind is pressuring it, soils are degrading, forests are deforested, biodiversity is at loss, water is polluted, oceans overfished, etc. We see and hear that and feel it also on a kind of a daily basis. And if we continue to that, if you continue like that, then I guess we need 3 planets by 2050 to sustain our current lifestyle. And this trend somehow needs to be halted. And so it is quite clear we cannot continue with that. We have to change. And the SDG is the SDGs provide us basically with a compass. It's the framework and secure life on Earth for the upcoming generation, for the coming generations. We have to concentrate on that. But, and this is the critical part, is to finance it. This is something we discuss a lot, and as the UN says, we have to get from billions to trillions. But these trillions can't be met by public funds alone. In fact, the financial need to achieve them will be greatly surpass all current development flows. Right now, we talk about an ODA for 150 billion. It's a number of 2019, 150 billion per year by public funding, but we talk about 1,500 billion US dollar by foreign direct investment from private sources. So it's 10 times more. And therefore also the UN says that sustainable, and I quote now, sustainable business models and private finance are major drivers for change for the SDGs. So basically,
thank you very much.
Can I just I will finalize. So it's not a question of whether we need, but it's a question of how can we tap this private funding. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard. Sylvia, you as the person who probably knows most about the detail of how to set up a fund. People usually get a bit worried when we're talking about finance because it does not seem to be sort of easy. The finance doesn't seem to be easy accessible, but it's also the topic as such. It's often sort of, it seems like a closed book. Now, your organization is one of the biggest asset managers in the world in this area. And we've just heard from Bernard, sort of, you know, the relationship between private money that's out there and specialized funds. Can you help us understand how a fund works, i.e. how you sort of, you know, attract money and how then you also distribute it?
Yeah, thanks for that question. And indeed, as Bernard has already mentioned, we're talking about big numbers here that are required to help change the production models to a more sustainable practice. And there comes in the question of how can we go beyond the classic donor financing? How can we bring in private capital for this, which, as you know, comes in with their criteria. That means they would like to have very clear rule set. They appreciate very clear structures that they can read and understand, which are trustworthy. So they need to be regulated and supervised, which means we're talking really about investment funds that are having their own, legal documentation, are registered with the regulatory authorities and are permanently supervised to make sure that everything is in order. But the other elements that are important for private investors is they would like to have risk protection. They want not to lose their capital. It's like with us depositors, if we entrust our savings to a bank, we want to make sure that the next day when we want to pick it up, that the deposits are still there and that I can still access them. And on the other side, and that's an additional third element, what they want is security. If they give capital, that they get something in return, and that this is also a rather secure income that they can get from the monies that they deploy. How do we now do this? Because as already outlined, we're talking here about emerging markets, we're talking about biodiversity, which is not a known investment topic. Yeah, I mean, I don't know whether your bank, for example, offers you a deposit account for biodiversity purposes. So it's unknown. For many, it's really a blank subject, like, yes, I want to do something good, but I don't exactly know what is behind and what is the risk profile of that asset, and what is it really where my money goes to. And therefore, what we have done together with support from particularly public donors and but also development finance institutions is to come up with so-called blended capital structures. These are investment funds which have a tiered capital structure where each tranche has a particular risk return profile. And as you said, I mean, this is a super technical topic. So perhaps let me use an illustration to make it a bit more practical what we're talking here when I talk about these layered capital structures. I think most of you may know the Black Forest cake, the very famous Black Forest cake, where you have different different layers. You have the biscuit at the bottom, then you have double cream as a second layer, then comes the cherries, then comes another double cream layer, and that comprises then your cake. So imagine an investment fund looks like a Black Forest cake with these different layers. And what we have as a foundation for the cake, as a biscuit, is precisely donor financing that comes from BMZ, for example, but also other public donors. Then in the middle range, we have development finance institutions with their capital. And then on top of it, we have private capital. And now, how does this work from a risk protection point of view, but also from an income distribution point of view? Well, normally when you eat a cake, you eat it from top to down. Yeah, so you put your fork up in the double cream and then it goes down to the biscuit layer at the very end. But this cake now, this investment fund works the opposite way. Let's imagine you invest now this pooled capital that you have mobilized through these different layers of capital. You invested in emerging markets for specific projects with specific investees, and now you have a loss. The money is not coming back. What happens is then this loss is accounted for in the biscuit layer, in the lowest layer, in the so-called first loss piece. So if something gets lost, the biscuit is hit first. If the biscuit disappears because of all the accumulated losses, then it creeps into the middle layer. So then comes the double cream layer with the cherries. And only if that gets lost, then the private investors, which sit in the top layer of the cake, would be affected. So this gives private investors a lot of comfort in terms of risk protection. And then when it comes to income distribution, it's the other way around. There, the cake really works top down. If there is something to distribute, then it first goes to the private investors, and then it works through the cake top to bottom. And that is actually a very, let's say, nice structure that is regulated, supervised, but at the same time gives the risk protection for assets, for investments that are not so much known for classic investors, and at the same time also gives a decent share of the income to the private investors.
I think we're going to deep dive into your cake in a moment and see how well it tasted up to now, and whether you might put in a couple of new ingredients, but that's for later. Yuga, WWF is a conservation organization. So why now this move towards a green economy?
Yeah, thank you, Connie, and thank you, Sylvia. I have to say I'm a cherry picker, but what? Okay, just to quickly set the scene here. For preserving and restoring ecosystems alone, the required investment is estimated as 300 to 400 billion US dollars. And Bernhard said already, so there's a huge amount of money needed. And only like around 50 billion US dollars is being invested in such projects, primarily funded via the public and the philanthropic sector. So with money only from governments and philanthropy, we will never be able to fill this funding gap. So it is estimated that the private sector could close more than half of this funding gap by stepping up profitable enterprises with a positive impact. So to talk about the role of WWF and other NGOs, I think we need to work with companies, we need to work with financial institutions and local stakeholders to develop bankable nature solutions projects, or to make it easier, like bankable projects. What is the meaning of a bankable project in this regard? These are projects that provide positive environmental and social impacts and provide a financial return on investment. So this way, we think we can deliver impacts that reduce pressure on ecosystems, drive resilience and sustainability for both people and nature, while generating positive financial returns for communities and investors. So I think the role of WWF is very complementary by not competing with impact investors, but acting as a conservation partner to public and private funders and to private sector projects on the ground. So we definitely need to combine commercial and non-commercial activities at landscape level in order to create most positive environmental and social impact. And WWF is already working on promising bankable projects embedded into a sustainable landscape approach.
And we are going to see an example later on how that actually works on the ground and who is profiting. And so I'd like to turn to Elke. The approach of Oro Verde is slightly different. You are also trying to create more sustainable production patterns, but you do it in a different way.
Yes, thank you very much, Connie, and it's a pleasure to being here. And I'm sorry a little bit for contradicting all of my prior speakers, because first of all, I'm not sure that money really is the biggest problem that we have. You said, Connie, that money is a means, and we heard from WWF and from the BMZ that it's needed a lot. Nevertheless, I'm quite cautious at using investments as money to achieve the means that we are talking about. Because investments which expect financial returns, as Sylvia explained quite well with the cherry cake, are only possible from a few value chains like coffee, cocoa, climate change emissions, climate certificates, timber maybe. These are things that work in the long term. And as Sylvia said, they are often high risks, and that reflects on the return expectations, so that there are high return expectations as well. Not always the risk sharing is fair. Often smallholders have to give their land as a guarantee for the payments or carry the currency exchange risks. And the investors, as Sylvia explained quite well with the cherry cake, they get the cream from the top and they get the safety net of the public biscuit that is at the bottom. And I'm not sure that it's fair to get the risks for the public, for the taxpayers' money finally, and leave the cream for the investors to eat on. Often these funds maintain the existing unequal structures, and biodiversity conservation is only an add-on. As Yuga said, there are some projects that manage to combine income for the local people, biodiversity conservation, but then the return for the investment is quite a challenge. What we see from our projects that functioning civil society and good governance structures in the countries are much more important than investing huge sums of money in the countries. To establish multi-stakeholder partnerships is a lot more important. Focusing on local, national value chains, the provision of ecosystem services in the regions works a lot better, and we do not need huge amounts of money for that. There is enough public money available if we look at all the harmful subsidies that are there, if we look at structures that finance deforestation, if we look at all the products that we import here in Europe that have a huge amount of embedded deforestation included. I think we should start at looking at all these wrong things first, and then talk about the money that we need for sustainable actions. Thank you.
Thank you very much for explaining where you come from and your perspective. And now we turn to Marta. As I said, a coffee grower. You have a farm in Nicaragua called Finca Bethania. We will visit that later on during this session. But what are you doing differently? And why do you need financing for doing what you're doing, i.e. being more sustainable?
Well, I need finance because the harvest is from January until April. Then since we begin to sell the coffee in June, July, but we have to start to work at the farm. We have to do all the work. And then we don't have the money because we don't have we didn't sell yet the coffee. So we need the money from the bank. And with that money that the bank lend us, then we can work until we get paid. We sell the coffee. That will be at the end of September. We pay the bank, and we get a new loan like in December. But we really need it because if not, there is no way for us to work, to produce at the farm. Yeah.
And we're going to talk about exactly what you change later on. You will explain the little steps that you are already engaged in. Bernhard,
Sure.
You have sort of, come with, as I said, as the eagle, with lots of facts and figures. And I think the easiest comparison you sort of made was 10 to 1, like sort of, the volume that needs to be generated. What strategy does the BMZ follow when you are cooperating with the private sector?
I think it has different perspectives on it. When we talk about cooperation with the private sector, I think one part is really what we just heard is using the private sector as a development machine on the ground and bringing development further for the communities. And the other part of the same coin basically is like using private funding, private investment to do that, to allow that. Yeah. When we talk about private sector as a machine on the ground, we are doing, we see that political, environmental, and economic challenges are all over the world, which cannot be solved by politics alone. Yeah. And I agree what Ms. Manigal said, that it is not only about funding or financial thing, and it is also about the politics, but it's not exclusively about politics setting the rule. I mean, you didn't say that, but this is what, is on the other side of the spectrum. I think we need an integrated approach with all the relevant forces within a the civil society as one, which consists of NGOs or churches working also in that topic. We need the political level, but we also need the economy, basically, to improve living conditions for the people on the ground. And I think the economies in our partner countries are often based very much on agriculture. This is in Africa and Asia, it's up to from 30 to 65% entirely depending on agriculture, and especially on small scale production in agriculture. So we need somehow an integrated approach on that, I think. And the other side is when we talk, that's what I said before, when we talk about mobilizing funding, yeah, I said, and we agreed that investment, or not, we didn't agree, but I said that the investment is the public investment with grants and the system is too small. Yeah, so we need somehow a system, and we are working on that. Beside cooperating through public-private partnerships, for example, we explore these blended finance mechanism, which have been, sorry, now my mobile phone is ringing, which have been described before with the cherry cake, where we can put incentives that private funding is mobilized to do that with leaving out the structures, the governance, the social and environmental standards. This is something which we definitely need to consider, but funding through in private means is absolutely, adding on that. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Bernard. And before I bring in Sylvia again, I would actually like to share with all of you that are watching right at the moment on the Wova platform the video that is already out there about the Eco Business Fund, because it has actually quite a good explanation of how it works, and you can also see exactly where it works. So maybe Martin, could you please start the video?
Eco Business Fund. The Eco Business Fund promotes business and consumption practices that contribute to biodiversity conservation, the sustainable use of natural resources, climate change mitigation, and adaptation to its impacts. The Eco Business Fund has been operating successfully in Latin America and the Caribbean since 2015. The key sectors the fund is operating in are agriculture and agri-processing, fishery and aquaculture, forestry, and tourism. These are all sectors which put increasing pressure on natural resources. Deforestation and land degradation, however, are not limited to Latin America and the Caribbean alone. Sub-Saharan Africa, home to some of the most pristine forest and biodiverse areas in the world, is facing similar threats. And so the decision was made for the Eco Business Fund to expand into Sub-Saharan Africa. KfW initiated the Sub-Fund for Africa on behalf of the German Ministry for Economic Cooperation and Development, and provided it with the initial funding of 18 million euros.
KfW regards itself as a climate and environmental bank. Our goal is to make the economy greener and more sustainable. This is true for Germany, but it is also true for our neighbor countries, for the whole world. The Eco Business Fund is a prime example how to achieve such a goal. And we showed that in Latin America with the Eco Business Fund. Now we think it is the right time to bring that success model to Africa. And we believe that the Eco Business Fund can achieve more or less the same good success as we achieved with the Eco Business Fund in Latin America.
The African Sub-Fund will include a special focus on forest landscape restoration measures. This will include agroforestry systems, as well as investments that reduce deforestation and land degradation pressures. All activities of the Eco Business Fund are geared towards generating impact. To date, the Eco Business Fund in Latin America and the Caribbean has contributed to 159,000 hectares of land under sustainable management, 280,000 jobs supported, 5.5 million tons of CO2 stored. This is the type of impact we hope to achieve in Sub-Saharan Africa as well. These impact figures are also linked to the Sustainable Development Goals.
Africa is a continent that is full of opportunity. And where there's opportunity, there's always a flow of resources. So essentially that means therefore that if you have to give Africa an opportunity to grow and grow sustainably, then resources that are coming in to support investment aspirations must of necessity have an impact in mind.
Eco Business Fund, investing in sustainability.
It sounds as if this was a success model, and with the success model we can, of course, and I hope that everybody can hear me, with the success model spreading now to Africa, going into another area, how did you define the success that has already happened, i.e. what are you bringing to Africa, and maybe also how do you actually make sure that everything is really directed towards sustainability goals?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, thank you for that question. And indeed, I mean, next to, let's say, the impact KPIs that you already saw there, and this is just a selection of actually 27 indicators that we are regularly measuring, because I think it's important because we are an impact investor, but also we're using public funding, that we are accountable for what this money is being used for and what impact it actually creates. But next to those impact or selective impact indicators that you saw, I think for us, another very important element for measuring success is certainly to what extent has the private sector, to what extent have private investors actually reacted positively to the structure, and what kind of volumes we actually could mobilize. And there, as I mentioned before, we actually have for the private investor piece, there is a limit being designed in order to ensure sufficient protection. That is currently a protection level of 70%, which means up to 30% is for the highest piece, which means where private investors are in, and that is fully subscribed right now. So we have all of that top layer being actually fully subscribed. We currently cannot do more because actually we're standing on these three legs: donor financing, then this mezzanine capital, which comes from development finance institutions primarily, and then private capital. And in order to extend that layer, we actually need to make the other layers grow too, so that also we can expand the top layer. So that is fully subscribed. So we currently have $120 million in the fund, which comes from private sources. And actually we have a queue of another 40 million that we could take up, but that we can't because of the risk protections currently not allowing for that. The other, I think, interesting success component is, and that is also referring to what Mrs. Manigal said, how to make sure that we make even more efficient use of the public funding, and how, in that sense, do we leverage it to the maximum. So there are two additional elements there. One is that we certainly want to reduce that layer of protection, so that actually private investors are willing to take more risk, meaning they come into the middle piece, or they may even invest alongside with us, even without risk protection. And that actually is starting to happen. So we, for example, opened the medium layer now for private investors. We have a first investor who came into the more risky capital piece, yeah. And we have one investor who has invested in the fund for 3 years now, and who has good experience now with the risk profile of the fund, and is actually willing to come along into investments in parallel to the fund without any risk protection. So I think this is very important steps forward to show, yes, you can gradually leverage even more private capital and also make them accept higher risks than at the start. The other element, and then I close, the other element here is we work not only directly with producers on the ground, but we also work with financial institutions, because these are very important intermediaries of capital on the ground. I mean, these are where the large pools of capital sit, and they decide who gets the money and who not. And what is important for us is that they, not only with our financing, support sustainable business practices, but that this becomes their standard, that this becomes the new norm, that also with their normal agricultural investment activities, they're supporting sustainable practices. And this is another element. We, for example, over the last 5 years, invested 400 million into financial institutions. However, they issued an equivalent of 870 million as loans to sustainable producers, which is double the amount. And that is important for us too, that they really embrace this, not only do it with our money, but actually also with their own money.
Thank you very much for explaining that. And one question, of course, is would the developments happen if you didn't finance them? I.e., would they do that without? But that's in the next round, please. So keep that question. Elke, what we heard you saying, or what I heard, was you don't actually need that much money. You actually need to have the right setup, multi-stakeholder partnerships approach. Yet, in order to change thinking, in order to change production methods, in order to even change extraction, you need new knowledge, you need different methods, and therefore you probably need a little bit of finance to get it all started.
Yeah, that is actually what we are doing with the projects that we implement. We're getting financing from the BMZ, as I said before, but also from the German Environmental Ministry and the ICI funding, International Climate Initiatives. And we do have two projects which I would shortly mention here. One is Forest Value in Guatemala, where we work with local value chains with cocoa farmers, a little bit like Martha with the coffee, where we help to establish biodiverse agroforestry systems. So we really work with systems that are not only the cocoa and the shade tree, but a little bit more diverse. And we help the farmers to organize themselves to do the fermentation and the drying together, but also with other products, with honey from the areas that they use. And we help them to promote the value chain to sell the products together in an organized way. And we help them with capital as well in order to buy the harvest, a little bit like Martha said in the beginning. What we see that it's quite few money that is needed. It's 6,000 euros that already help the farmers to buy the harvest from 1 year and then to do the production and to sell it at a better price, at an increased price. And that works quite well. So it's not a huge amount of money that you need to get that done. The second project is about green watersheds, where we work in 4 countries, in Guatemala, in the Dominican Republic, in Cuba and in Mexico, in watersheds with the provision of ecosystem services. So how can adaptation with ecosystem based on ecosystems help to support the water flow within the watersheds? With the climate change, it's going to get drier, as we see here in Europe at the moment. And ecosystems can help to mitigate that, and the provisioning of these services is quite important. First of all, we were thinking about establishing financial mechanisms so that the water users downstream can help pay for the ecosystem services upstreams. But we found that it's not so important to have the finance mechanisms, but it's much more important to get all the stakeholders on board, to get all the actors in the watershed that are working on water, that are working in the region on one table, and get them to build together the trust that they can work to maintain the water in the region. So it's not so much to design finance mechanisms where one gives finance and the other takes the finance, but it's more important to integrate the actors in the region, and that this is the money that's really needed for the stakeholder processes, for getting people together on one table and on one page. And that's not a huge amount of money either. And both of the activities are activities that generate return for the local communities and for the local actors, but not necessarily for an investor from outside.
Thank you very much for that, Elke. And I'd like to ask Yuga. You have also tried and tested your approach. So the WWF projects with the concept of the bankable solution has already worked. And where it has worked, why has it worked?
So I have to say, in general, we are in the process actually of doing these kind of projects. So what WWF did already, we identified good bankable projects embedded into a sustainable landscape approach, including local partners on the ground. WWF has raised money via the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. I might say some further details later on related to the Uganda video. So also WWF was able to access money for establishing the landscape approach in priority areas, and also to structure sustainable bankable projects. Other achievements we reached so far is that WWF is very much a convener. We support, for instance, the creation of multi-stakeholder platforms at landscape level in order to engage the private and the public sector on the ground. But we also create moments of exchange, such as a forest landscape restoration investors workshop. So we identify project opportunities And instead of just developing it towards we think it should be developed, we pitch it during this event to investors, to potential investors, to create a space for co-development. We think that's very important because we're not talking the same language. Like investors often have no clue what's going on the ground and what the difficulties are, and the other way around, because the project developers have no idea what needs the financial sector has. So we have to get out of our comfort zone. We have to get out of our bubble. We have to talk to each other to create this together. And what we are also doing, we are currently working on a PSB project where WWF leads on the work package on private sector mobilization and engagement in relation to the political commitment of forest landscape restoration, meaning Bonn Challenge. And we also are working with the private sector to design a foundation for resilient landscapes where corporate money will be the main funding source. I think that's also very interesting because normally we see public money coming in, but it's like really corporate money they are interested to put money into in order to develop bankable projects embedded into a sustainable landscape approach. So these are achievements. We are on our way, to be honest.
You mentioned the Uganda film, and I actually think it would be quite nice to illustrate what you have just now said by having a quick look at this video. It's a minute and a half, and maybe Martin, you could start it from far away so that we have a look at the success in Uganda.
The Greater Virunga landscape encompasses Rwenzori Mountains National Park and Queen Elizabeth National Park. They contain precious ecosystems which support significant biodiversity vital to the health of Uganda and the rest of the world. Uganda's population is growing fast, placing greater pressure on our landscapes. To meet rising national demand for timber while relieving pressure on native forests, outgrowers and timber grower associations from 12 districts are ready to restore over 100,000 hectares of forest. International investment is needed to scale up project activities, including tree planting and purchasing processing equipment.
So I think what we've seen here today has been a perfect example of something that could be scaled up and has a lot of potential. We've seen significant value add. We've seen slope stability happening from planting trees where they would have otherwise been growing crops. You have protection by creating a buffer with the natural forest. So from the perspective of securing biodiversity, securing livelihoods, securing sustainable wood supply, this has everything.
With international investment and support from local people, WWF can help secure the future of our unique ecosystems and improve outcomes for people and nature.
So Yuga, you mentioned that you see yourself more as a convener. In this case, it has already sort of got some fruit to bear, in fact, some trees to bear.
Yeah, and maybe to give you some further background and some updates about the project. So I think one reality is, and as mentioned in the video, by 2040, it is expected that the Uganda's population of nearly 40 million people will double to 75 million people, which obviously places greater pressure on land. So this is one reality, right? So together with Uganda Wildlife Authority and the National Forest Authority, WWF has worked with communities to restore already 16,000 hectares of degraded lands on national park boundaries. And you have seen the picture on creating a buffer to the natural forest. In terms of updates, the Virunga landscape is one of the selected landscapes for the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. I think this is a perfect example of a blended finance approach, and maybe Bernhard, you can take your notes. It is a public money being used to support sustainable private sector business models in order to leverage private money. So the Dutch Ministry of Foreign Affairs has made available 160 million euros to be managed by a pioneering consortium of which WWF Netherlands is part of, and led by the Dutch Entrepreneurial Development Bank, FMO. So the 160 million of DFCD, of the Dutch fund, shall accelerate the flow of institutional and commercial capital into climate resilient investment and mobilize over 500 million of private capital. So as said, Virunga Landscape has been selected. The money of the Dutch fund is already invested into the landscape approach and in order to make the projects investment ready. And I think this is an interesting approach we could also try to replicate. For instance, for Germany, right? We just have to copy and paste because we have to higher our ambitions.
Thank you, Yuga. Marta, you're on the ground. I mean, all these figures that we hear, several million here, several million there, that's probably something that you dream about. In your area, you are actually one of the bigger coffee growers in this particular area. So how are people around you looking at what you do on your farm?
Well, I think first I have to tell you that I'm even looking how they are doing because they are smaller. They don't have really the money, and so they know they have the knowledge. It's like so at the beginning I begin to look to see how they were doing because well, with that climate change that affect a lot the coffee. Now the temperature is really hot. So sometimes we have so many sickness from the trees, and so my neighbors knew how to manage, but in a small scale. And the only thing that I'm doing better, maybe I could say, is like I am trying to use new method, like to see how I can recycle the water that we clean the coffee. Or something that we are doing different is like well, we are at the beginning, we have a lot of charro trees. Then there was a moment that the people say, you have to cut it because you have more beans. They begin to cut it, but with the climate change, that was a big mistake. So now I am planting more trees, and I am planting even banana trees, because in that way, the banana, the people can eat too. And that helped to preserve the soil, the humidity from the soil. Because we could see it really in the last, I would say, 5 years, we lost so much from the water, and like when it's raining so strong and the water go right away, they don't get inside the roots, the root of the trees. So that's why we are planting, trying to reforest. And we preserve a little, some acres from the farm, only to have that forest. That way we can, because we need the humidity. Yeah. That's so, and with that way, I say the coffee is better. You get the better pay. You can eat better. It's like a chain. Everything is winning. Yeah.
In fact, it sounds more like a net, and the conditionality. Yeah, that.
But anyway, I am agree with Elke. We need some much technical aid, really. It's like I will say 3 months ago we were Ecofund make a meeting in my town, and I participated in that meeting, and they took us to the farms and they began to explain us how to work in with the minimum that we have, and that was really great. We need that technical support too.
Well, thank you very much for sharing that. And as I said, we're going to take all the people that are watching also onto a journey to have a look at your farm. But I see that on Woover, certainly there are a lot of questions, a lot of commentaries going around. But there's one that's sort of been on top of it all. And I'm not quite sure who of you wants to actually answer that. a number of people are asking, what do you think is a green economy? And I'm just sort of looking at your faces. Anybody wanting to take the definition of green economy? Looking, everybody smiling. Bernard, maybe sort of that would be sort of in the area of an eagle.
Yeah, I can try, but I don't have an official definition of a green economy. But what we at BMZ think when we talk about green economy is a kind of, an environmentally friendly, a climate friendly way of doing economic business. Yeah, so that we incorporate the consequences our economic behavior will have for the environment, for the biodiversity, and for the climate on a longer run, and not excluding it from our thinking. This is what I would say.
Maybe Yuga, seeing that we had started off by sort of saying that WWF has sort of come from a different area, but now is looking at sort of this holistic view on how to do things differently, and maybe Elke as well. How would you, from your standpoint, define a green economy?
So, I think what's a very important point here, and it's also related to Elke's comment in the very beginning, there is investment. There will always take place lots of investments. And I think we have to be clear. As long as we don't have the answer to the questions to create other opportunities, such as sustainable investment opportunities, and this is what I understand under green economy, that these investment opportunities are sustainable. As long as we will not come up with any answer to this question, the money will be invested into non-sustainable activities, which put at high risk all our ambitions and all our work we are doing on conservation. And if we compare the money we have for our small projects as WWF, it's nothing compared to the private sector. So we don't have any possibility not to work with them, not to change the game, because otherwise we will not win. So,
Elke, your take on green economy?
For me, one of the most important things, it might not fit the official definition of green economy, but for me, the basis of living on this planet is biodiversity. Everybody is talking about the climate crisis, but nobody talks about the biodiversity crisis. And I think a little bit, as Martha explained quite well a minute ago, the coffee was getting drier when the shade trees were away. So biodiversity actually contributes to have stable systems on the planet. The water provisioning is one of the most important. The pollinators is something that we are seeing here in Europe is quite important. So biodiversity for me is the basis, and the economy should be built on this basis. And as Hugo said, there is a lot of unsustainable investments and a lot of unsustainable business practices. And I think we have to change that first. And that's a little bit coming back to a comment Bernard Worms made in the beginning, that politics cannot save it alone. But I think we need politics to give strong regulations and lines in order to have more sustainable business working. And the deforestation that we are seeing at the moment is not only coming from investors, but it's also coming from unsustainable business practices. And in order to change that, I think it's not only the incentives, the carrots dangling there, but it's also the stick that you have to have very strict rules. If it's not economically more viable to have biodiverse agroforestry systems, you will not get the price for the coffee or the cocoa that is grown with less production per hectare. If you get more production per hectare and you can get a lower price, but at a cost for biodiversity and for the sustainability of the system afterwards. So I think we need regulations by politics that enhance the prices as well, so that everybody can produce sustainably. And that is something that politics needs. And for that, especially in the countries that we are working on, a strong civil society is quite important. And we need to strengthen the civil society, the local actors, as Martha said, that technical assistance is very important. And I think that public money should go in that direction and not to give the basis for the cream for the investors. Thank you.
So, I know, Bernard, that you want to say something, but Sylvie, in analogy to the green economy, there's also sort of this demand to have more green finance. Do you consider yourself being an example, a prime example of green finance?
Yes, we would say so. And perhaps coming also back to what the previous speakers have said, and also to be very clear, we think at the end of the day, what it needs is a collaborative approach, and money alone is not enough. Though the focus of my speech up to now has been very much on the financing side, we provide technical assistance because we know that this is a requirement, and Martha has already alluded to that. We work with technical assistance both with the financial institutions, we work with technical assistance also at the producer level, but we also work on the political level. And for example, we're part of a movement in Latin America to introduce green protocols in the banking system so that environmental standards get introduced into the banking world. We also believe very strongly that because the challenge is so big, it's not just a matter of, is it €1 billion or is it 2 billion euros? I mean, everyone has to chip in. It's a question of regulation. And unfortunately, I have to say, we're seeing many countries where actually the regulator allows openly deforestation. Yeah. And actually even has regulation that encourages this, and there are even tax incentives connected to it. Yeah. So certainly in such an environment, even the best financing will have difficulties if the framework conditions are not set in a conducive way. Perhaps to come back to your question about what we think it still requires and what it takes, and how do we make sure that we exactly get to this transformational change and the systemic change. And in that sense, probably we take particularly that view. It's not about single projects or single initiatives. We think we need to really have a paradigm shift here. And when I recall, 6 years ago, 7 years ago, when we had the first discussions with the financial intermediaries, financial sector in the different countries in Latin America, everyone was saying, biodiversity? What is this about? Why should this matter to me? Why is this important to me? You're a biologist? Sorry, I'm a banker. I'm talking about figures. But now, this has quickly changed. The narrative has extremely changed because bankers now clearly say, we feel the climate change. We feel that our lands are getting dried. We feel that the productivity levels get reduced. We see that natural disasters kick in. Yeah, but what shall we do? What can we do to actually ensure that they're good investments also going forward? So the narrative has extremely changed, and they're looking at us, and we see ourselves in that facilitator role to make them become aware what sustainable practices are and why this is not only good for the environment, but also from the credit risk perspective, why it's good for them. Because if you have a well-functioning biosystem that protects yields, that ensures that these producers can continue producing also next year and during the next decade.
When one feels your passion about the issue, Bernard, you wanted to chip in earlier.
Yeah, thank you. Because Elke, she mentioned what I said before about politics, and I'm very happy that that it goes now in a little bit in that direction. That we are not exclusively talking about this funding and financial need. Also, what Sylvia said right now, that this the discussion around this additional financial need is an additional component in the entire field of development cooperation. It is of course needed that we that we have good governance structures in which this additional funding can unfold and has a positive impact. We need to integrate the societies, the the civil societies, and in order to see what they need, what kind of need is in their biodiversity, and to define that. So it's a very broad field in which the additional financing is extremely important. And another point I wanted to raise is that this is not necessarily all about us, what we want. It is also what we can offer to our partner governments, basically. Yeah. So what you just described, Elke Mannigl, about the situation in Central America, the project develops well. In other countries, it wouldn't, because the structures, the laws, and what Sylvia right now said, the laws are completely going in a different way. Yeah. So it doesn't only help. And that's what we do from BMZ. We work on all the different layers. So we work on a policy basis, and we provide support if needed. We provide with technical assistance, but also then on the medium level or on the civil society level, we also provide support. So this is important, that we are not now thinking that the entire development cooperation should only consist of financial cooperation. It is an added aspect and offering additional possibilities for those who set the right safeguards, who follow the standards, etc. Yeah, thank you.
Thank you for clarifying that. I see again a couple of other questions, and I'm not quite sure whether we'll be able to answer all the questions that the audience has kindly posted on WUVA. But one is, and I think that's something that is quite important. How do we ensure that the priorities of foreign investors do not displace the necessities on the ground? And I don't know who might want to take it first. Maybe Yuga, is that something that you look at?
Sorry. So,
the displacement, i.e. sort of the necessities on the ground, but you don't want sort of to have this money coming in and just saying, they will finance it. So why should we bother? Why should we put too much attention to it?
I think what's very important here, and I mentioned it already, I think we have to get out of our bubbles. We have to talk to each other. We have to co-design and co-develop good projects with the project implementers themselves and the financial sector together, in order to make sure that we are not getting into these kind of risks, right? And of course, I think what's important here also to mention risk sharing, which can be done at 3 levels. First of all, at project level, second and third on investment structure and fund level. So I would say risk sharing at project level is the most important one. So we need to use good project design that are fair in both positive and negative scenarios. So for instance, meaning for investors and investees. So one example is seedlings and technical assistance are provided to farmers for free. Yeah. And if trees fail, then the farmers owe nothing. So public money can be used to fund these kind of technical assistance activities and to design good structures and reduce risks.
Thank you. Elke, maybe before we have another look at Martha's Farm, there is a question about positive supply chains, the creation of positive supply chains. Is that something that you also look at, like end-to-end local supply chains?
It is actually, we do it both ways. On one hand, the local supply chains, for example, with the honey that comes from the diverse agroforestry systems, which is marketed locally within the communities or in neighboring communities where we help and support the establishment of the supply chains. But we also do it with cocoa and coffee, with supply chains that go until Germany. We see there that it's a need for high quality products in order to get the additional pricing that we need, because the production per hectare of our biodiverse agroforestry systems is a lot lower than the production per hectare of a plantation that only has one shade tree and a lot more trees. So we need actually the additional pricing. And I think that is very important for me, that at the moment, illegal activities or activities that support deforestation or loss of biodiversity have often economic incentives as they get better prices on the market, as they can find better markets for their products. And I think that is something that we need to change. Sylvia was saying before that we need really transformational changes and paradigm shifts. And I think I quite agree with that. We need that in order to reduce unsustainable business practices. And only then we will manage to get the sustainable businesses the prices that they really need to get their products on the market. It's something that Bernard Worms said about the government's policies that are probably in place in Latin America, but not always. There, for example, for timber, there's a lot of illegal timber harvests going on, so that the people who actually do sustainable timber management do not get the prices that they need to put their products on the market. Or it's a lot easier to sell cattle and illegal products from illegal activities from the national parks than the natural harvested non-timber forest products. So I think we need to change the politics, the government regulations in order to support more the sustainable activities that come from biodiversity conservation and reduce the impacts that we have from deforestation. And there needs to be the paradigm shift, and that is not necessarily a question of money and investments, but a lot more of government regulations.
Thank you, Elke. I'm having a quick look at the time. We have around about 20 minutes left. So I think this is a beautiful time to have a look at Martha's farm, because we've already talked about it. Now we can actually see it. We see how green it is, and especially sort of, being embedded in a forest. So Martin, could you please share with us the video that was taken in Nicaragua?
Finca Betania está ubicada en el municipio de Dipilto, en la frontera norte de Nicaragua, con una altura que oscila entre los 1.200 y los 1.500 metros sobre el nivel del mar. Su extensión es de 60 manzanas de tierra, de las cuales 15 están destinadas al rescate y conservación del bosque en su totalidad. El manejo sostenible que está realizando a los recursos bosque, agua y suelo, así como la responsabilidad social para con sus trabajadores, le ha hecho merecedora de la certificación Rainforest Alliance. Finca Betania se enfrenta a retos como fortalecer y mantener sus medidas de adaptación al cambio climático, continuar con las acciones que garantizan condiciones laborales justas para sus trabajadores y en general apuesta por ser una finca integral que priorice los recursos naturales y humanos con los que cuenta.
Para que esto logre salir adelante siempre con el respeto al medio ambiente, el respeto a la gente que trabaja para nosotros. Cuando se trata bien al trabajador, el café está mejor cortado, se trata de pagar mejor, se trata de que todos ganemos.
And there we were almost at the end, and it broke off. So Martha, congratulations. You and your sister are changing the system there. How do you take the people along? This time, not the neighbors, but the people that are working on the farm. When you suddenly come around and say, well, we're not going to use chemical fertilizers anymore. We do it this differently. Are they open to it? Or are they saying, well,
no. They are completely open. They even want that way. The people that work with me, I can say they are like right now we make 400 bags from only from the pulp, from the coffee, from a chicken and dog, and we work that how it goes, the land, not the land, the how we call that, la tierra, the earth.
Yes, yeah.
We make 400 bags. Yeah, 400 bags, and they were really happy to make it. That's what they want, the people, I think, to change. Yeah, they are really happy. And I'm going to tell you something. Yesterday there was the Cup of Excellence, And our farm, we have 2 farms. The other one just beside a smaller one. We are between the 20 last for the Cup of Excellence, number 6 and number 17 from the best coffee of Nicaragua. Only like that.
Congratulations! That sounds really
good. We have a really great team, and they like what is from the natural. They don't want fertilizing with chemical. No.
With so no chemicals anymore, but everything that's natural, sort of old and traditional methods that have been newly recovered again. Marta, there's also, when I looked at the figures, a quarter of your farm are woods. Was that always the case? Is that traditional?
Always the case, always. We don't have so much coffee if you want, because the produced it is not so much because the light is hard to pass, but we have really good quality. And like the coffee price for us is a lot better that way. Yeah.
Sylvie, we have sort of 2 diverging questions in the stream. The one says, actually, programs like the Eco Business Fund are really nice to have, but they're just much too small. On the other hand, I was worried, and I'm really happy that you actually also support smaller farmers like Marta's farm. So size matters, does it?
Well, we are taking a very inclusive approach because, as I said before, we want a systemic change. And that means we not just want to handpick one or the other, but rather want to have a systemic change. And therefore, we work, yes, with larger estates. I admit that because they cover a large land and often they're seen as reference points for other producers. So if we can make them change, it may have also a knock-on effect, a positive one, to the sector at large. But we're also working with smallholders. And there the approach is largely working with cooperatives in order, again, also to have a systemic approach and not just single hand-picked small producers. And there often we work also with NGOs together, which are supporting these communities. So in that sense, again, for us, what matters is that we achieve an as much scale effect as possible, and we, in that sense, take a very inclusive approach.
Actually, that brings us back to what Bernard was saying at the beginning, when you sort of, talked about the numbers, the big numbers. You almost sort of hit us with it. Yeah. So how do the big numbers and the smaller farmers go together, Bernard?
Yeah, thank you very much, because I just wanted to add on what Sylvia was saying about the smallholders and about these big funding mechanisms. It's, for us, it is definitely an important topic not to address when we support a Eco Business Fund, for example, that the funding goes to or our support goes exclusively to big enterprises. No, we have the smallholders in mind, and we are currently discussing with KfW and Finance in Motion about an additional facility exactly to allow supporting smallholders or smallholder organizations, maybe not the each and every smallholder, but like the producer organizations, to allow them or to make them preparing bankable projects and getting right to access these fundings from a funding mechanism like that. Because this is also what Yula was saying before, that we have a lack of also of these kind of mechanisms. Even if funding is out there, loans are out there, that smallholders or small producer organizations cannot prepare projects which fit to these type of funding mechanisms. Yeah, so we have that in mind, and it is important to us to also to go in that direction. That's thank you.
I saw Elke sort of going, I need to get in now.
Yes, thank you. I think it's a little bit what Sylvia said before, that bankers or investors didn't know about biodiversity in the beginning. And now we are saying that projects need to learn how to be bankable. And I think we looked at a lot of impact investment funds or impact investments in a study a couple of years back. And what we found is that investors don't only know nothing about biodiversity, but they're also not including the possibilities that biodiversity can minimize the risks of the investment, for example. So I think what we need to change is the way that bankers or investors do risk assessment. At the moment, they are looking at, for example, our biodiverse agroforestry systems, and they say the yield is not enough per hectare, and that's what we are not going to give money. But they are not seeing that it's a lot lower risk for climate change impacts or for insect impact. So I think we actually need to change the way risks are assessed in order to invest, and that leads to a transformational change. And maybe it should be more important to get public money into the new development of risk assessments, or to find new ways of changing this risk assessment in order to leverage private money. Because I think if you look at 70% of public funding and 30% of private funding is not a huge leverage effect that we have there. Yeah. So maybe in order to really change the system, we need to change that as well, the way the investors are thinking.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much.
I may come in on this, if you allow, just to correct what you just mentioned. 30% private is not, in that sense, perhaps a high figure, but actually in the Agribusiness Fund, we have more private capital now in. It's 32% because we have the first ones also going into the middle piece, and we have 28% public money only. So in that sense, we already have a higher share actually of private capital. And as I mentioned before, we're working on this. We're lowering, for example, now the protection limits precisely to incentivize privates to take more risk. So I think we are on the way. Certainly, we would like to be faster, and we would like to see that movement happening even quicker. But I think we see it's working into the direction. The first private investors come into the middle piece. And we also have first investors now really taking directly the risk, which I think is great to see. But I also would like to echo what you said. I think for us, actually, the biggest change that we're noticing is that bankers really incorporate environmental elements into the risk assessment. Yeah. I mean, just to give an example, coffee sector, I think they're now very much aware how important shade-grown practices or growing coffee under shade actually are. At least the banks we're working with very much acknowledge that. In El Salvador, for example, but we're also working with one bank in Nicaragua on this. They also now started to really look at the entire value chain, so including now also the coffee mills, yeah, which I think is also important because they're one of the largest water consumers, yeah. And by introducing good technology, you can save, up to 60% of the water, and also by recycling that water, by, for example, producing organic fertilizer, you're also avoiding negative runoff effects into the watershed. So, a banker probably, before having worked with us, they would have never even known what a watershed really is and why this is relevant. And now, they're looking at maps together with us and say, look, we have established this kind of impact of the coffee mill. We heard about this new technology. Is this giving the benefits to justify the investment? How do you look at that? So I think this is a very interesting conversation, actually, we're getting into right now. And for example, in Nicaragua, the two banks we're working there, they have now fully mapped the land from a watershed perspective, soil erosion perspective, forestry presence, which I think is a great systemic shift, as you mentioned, that bankers start looking at that. Is that good enough? I would say no. Certainly, we need to continue working on that. But compared to where we started the conversation about 6 years ago, I would say it goes into a good direction.
Thank you very much for the intervention, Yuga. On the way, you actually wanted to speak after Elke, but that's fine. I would like you to consider in your answer one of the points that somebody made in the WUVA conversation, and actually said what we have to watch out for is also greenwashing. So if you mentioned that you cooperate with corporations, I think, or I get the feeling from the question questions in the stream that some people might feel uneasy with that. So maybe you could sort of incorporate that into your answer.
Okay, all right. So because I would like to make several points, I think there are two layers Elke and Silvia did talk about. And first of all, there is this layer, we really have to work on a robust safeguard system, sustainable investment criteria. But then there is the other layer, it's to work on bankable projects, create bankable projects, make them bankable, also to come back to Bernhard. And because there are lots of funds out there, but we lack a good pipeline of investable deals. And we need money, and we need public money, to be honest, in order to support a pipeline of bankable projects that provide positive environmental and social impact and provide a financial return on investment, because this is money is needed for this. And to come back to the greenwashing topic, so of course this might always be of concern, but I suggest the following. I think it's very important to create good partnerships, different groups here, like NGOs, like impact investors and so on, working together. And NGOs should and could work as conservation partners to public and private funders to make sure that no greenwashing is taking place.
Thank you very much. And also, I suppose that you do due diligence and don't let them get away with just stating something that comes out of corporations that is sort of just a facade, but that the corporations that you work with have been screened and are cooperating. Maybe, Bernhard, that's a question. We have been at the beginning talking about the issue that, yes, private capital needs to be involved. Donor countries will look at these kind of corporations that are out there. Do you face criticism for that outlook? And how do you tackle that?
I mean, in a type of these discussions we are having right now, or with other institutions, there is some kind of criticism or skepticism that it is all good, no? But I think it is important that we, and I can just repeat myself, that we of course don't see in a way of working the exclusive success factor. No, it is that we need to engage in that. We need to offer a different type of possibilities in the countries, but on the same side, and this is very important, and I mention it again, we need to work also on supporting our partners in the governance and in the civil society aspects of it. So I don't want get into the direction that we just look into this financial cooperation thing. It's, as I said before, it's an added topic.
Thank you. Thank you. I was just sort of reflecting of what was in the stream, and I think in the end we probably need all players to get what several of you have talked about, i.e. the systemic change that will get us into this green economy. However, just as much as sustainability, it's a process. We're not there yet, and it's a long way to go. We're sort of coming towards the end. We have 6 minutes left, and when you walk away from this panel discussion, and maybe each and every one of you who's out there watching us, you might also sort of give it a thought. What are the priorities that you will be setting in the next year? I.e., I would think, Silvia, collect more money, apply it better, make the funds work in Africa?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, obviously, we would like to transfer, I think, the learnings and the experience, from Latin America to Sub-Saharan Africa, being certainly also very well aware that this requires adjustment because Africa is different from Latin America. I mean, the crops, the landscapes, the environmental challenges, the political environment, but also the local producers, the local organizations, etc. So therefore, yes, we take the learnings and are very much looking forward to Africa. We are also very cognizant that there's more needed in terms of breeding bankable projects, that there is a need for taking perhaps up projects at an earlier stage than what we have done up to now. I think this is also what you alluded to, Bernhard, with respect to what we call now as a working title, a catalyst facility, where we would get engaged into more pilot initiatives, which are untested models, but which look very interesting from an impact perspective, and where we feel being done successfully could serve as a role model to be then being copied at a larger scale by other players. So this is, for example, an additional complement that we're now looking into because we feel there is a need for that. And indeed, not all projects are in that sense bankable right away or would be considered to be bankable right away. The other important component for us is local currency. I think that has also been mentioned, that particularly when we talk about smallholder farmers, we should not and do not want to expose them to hard currency risk, particularly in these emerging markets with high volatility when it comes to exchange rates. So this is, for example, also an additional component we're looking into. And then clearly it's about leveraging more private capital with less public money, and in that sense become also more efficient and effective on that side. And at the end, I mean, the end game certainly.
So that the others can still continue.
Sorry, then I stop here. 3 points. I made my 3 points.
Right. Okay, Marta, 2 things you're going to do differently next year.
Well, to get more green. Yes,
to get more green.
That climate change, we have so much problem that now I would like to have a long-term loan to recycle the water. That's what I'm going to look now.
You're talking to the right people. Elke, one thing or 2 things you're going to intensify in the next year.
Well, we are going to intensify lobbying for the support of civil society and strong governance structures in the areas that we are working on, and to split the risk more evenly, not only let the risk go to the public investments and the profits go to the private, the cream on the top of the cake go to the private sector again. I think we should separate that and distribute it more equally. Eat the cake, everybody.
Gosh, there have been so many historic cakes around, and I'm not going to allude to some of the others. So Yuga, the one thing that you're looking at.
Yeah, I think what's needed from my side to also work more with the public sector in order to create a good pipeline of bankable projects. And that's also a request to Bernhard, like, let's copy paste models such as the Dutch Fund for Climate and Development. It's working already well. Let's replicate in order to scale up our ambitions. And in terms of bankable projects, I would like to quickly use the opportunity to launch our new report on a blueprint, which is related to bankable projects. A blueprint, a source of inspiration of good bankable projects all over the world. So let's copy paste, let's further go into this direction.
Thank you very much. You have 1 more minute, Bernhard.
Okay, and I take that comment with me. Thank you. No, to me, I think it is, we talked a lot about our partner countries, and what I would like that we see also a change within the next year, in the next years, is also in our own behavior where we are here, and that we reflect of the consequences our consume here in Germany, here in Europe, has for our partners in the field of development cooperation. So that when we buy cheap coffee, when we buy cheap fruits, when we buy cheap flowers or everything, that this has an origin in our partner countries, and that we have to think twice when we buy these kind of products, that people are at the beginning of this value chain and work sometimes in conditions which are not as good as we wish. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. And I think we are sort of finishing on the dot. Thank you very much for your attention, everybody who was in the WUFA space. Thank you very much, everybody here, all the panelists on Zoom. And I know that there is a learning track. We continue this conversation there. So have a last couple of great hours for the Global Landscapes Forum. And sorry about the little hiccup at the beginning. An echo isn't always that pleasant to live with, but good ideas should be echoed all the time. So thank you very much and see you around.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye. See you.